Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build a mule. Not the animal mule, rather a mechanical mule. You can tell it's not the animal by looking at the box. This is a 28mm scale plastic wargaming kit from Rubicon Models. The back of the box has a very basic painting guide, a 3D render, and some information about the mule and its history. Pretty standard for a Rubicon box, really. Inside the box we find one sprue. One is all we need. There's all manner of bits and pieces here. A single crew figure, a couple of pew-pew sticks, and what I think is a good, thoughtful inclusion, a bunch of stowage. Which obviously makes sense with a vehicle like this, which is used to move things like stowage and ammo and whatever around the place. Much like a mule might be used. Surely that has nothing to do with why they call this a mule, though. I do wish more kits, not only from Rubicon, but all manufacturers, would include more stowage. It's a simple way to add more life to pretty much any model, really. Anyway, the plastic in this kit is rather nice and neatly moulded. There are mould lines, of course, but they're not too severe and won't take too much time to remove. The detail is pretty good, though some of the parts are a bit chonky. That's not really unexpected with a wargaming kit, and it does still look good. The crew figure looks pretty decent too. Rubicon's crew figures have definitely come a long way. Will I build the figure? Stick around to find out.
We saw the thumbnail, Herbert. We know you built the figure.
In that case, here's the instructions. They are pretty good overall, much like every other set of Rubicon instructions I've seen. I did have some minor gripes though, particularly around the little footrest thing and gear shifter at the front. It would have been helpful to have some different angles of the finished object depicted. Not a huge issue though. Okay, let's glue some plastic together. I start with the floor, or hull? I think I'll stick to calling it the floor. If you're planning on mounting armaments to this, you will need to drill a hole where that circular thing on the bottom is. I won't be doing that, so I just glue the fuel tank on. You'd have to try really hard to get this wrong. Even I got it right first go. Next, I glue the two parts of the engine together. I'm sure there are many technical words I should be using here, but I refuse. The two parts go together easily. Then, why not attach that to the underside of the floor part? There are some helpful bits of keying for this, so again, you'd have to try pretty hard to get this wrong. But if you do want to get it wrong, I believe in you. Next come these frame parts. Initially I did have a little bit of trouble understanding how they should sit because of the angle of the instruction diagram, but I think I figured it out in the end. It's not that complicated. This cap, I guess you might call it, goes onto the rear axle part, and there is some keying here. It's small, but it is there. Once that's together, it made sense to glue it into place. You can see there's a couple of narrow bits on the frame parts we just installed. The axle assembly slides over those. I then add the forward axle part, and this goes on pretty much the same way as the rear one. A drive shaft that joins the front and rear axles goes on next, and while this wasn't the most difficult thing to get into place, it was a bit of a tight fit, and I had to use a bit of force and kajigger it a bit to get it to sit properly. It's on, so I can go forth and assemble this engine cage, for lack of better terms. The parts don't have what you might call strong keying, but you'll know when they're together properly. Best to set this aside to bond before trying to install it, and while that's happening, it's a really good time to install wheels. This looks pretty easy, because it is. There's D-shaped keying because the bottom of the wheels is slightly flattened, which represents the vehicle having some weight to it, so it wouldn't do to put these on upside down. The keying will stop you. Probably. I then put the engine cage on. There are contact points on the axle part and the front, or maybe it's the rear, of the floor part, and it was a bit fiddly to get it into place, more than I was expecting it to be. I got it done though, eventually. I then added this thing here. I'm sure it's very important and has a fancy name. The side railings come next, and these are very easy to get into place. There's a front railing, which is just as easy to position. It goes at the front. And at the rear, or is it the front? I guess both ends can be the front and rear, depending on how the mule is being used. Anyway, there's a tiny bit of railing at this end as well. Time to assemble the foot pedal cage thing. First, I glue the foot pedal part into a hole on the underside of the top of the cage part. This wasn't totally obvious in the instructions, at least not to me. I let it sit for a bit, and when it was bonded, I glued that assembly into the bottom of the cage part. It's not really much of a cage, but I can't think of anything else to call it. Getting this together was quite fiddly. The video does kind of make it look like it was done nice and quick, but I did spend a fair bit of time arsing about with this. Eventually it is together though, and I turn my attention to the gear shifters and steering column. You have to make a choice here. The model can be built with either the driver sitting on the mule, or controlling it while walking behind it. Actually, in hindsight, now that I think about it, there doesn't seem to be an option for a walking figure. If you do want to build that version, I guess refer to the instructions. The gear sticks and such were a little bit fiddly to get into place, but once you get your head around it, it's not hard. That assembly can then be glued into place on this end of the mule. There's a little notch for it to slot into, though it does have some play to it, so you'll probably have to do a bit of nudging. The bar coming down from the steering column should rest against that nubbin on the floor. Then, why not add the pedal cage? It goes right next to the steering and gearing assembly. Again, you might need to do a bit of nudging, but this is pretty simple. The seat comes next, and there's a pretty obvious guide for it. It looks a lot more comfortable than I would expect for this kind of thing. The steering wheel comes next, and this simply slides onto the end of the shaft. Obviously the shaft is angled so the driver can use the wheel. It looks rather weird, but it's not incorrect, even if my brain disagrees and says,
It should be vertical.
Only one piece of the stowage needed assembly, this ration box, and it's a simple matter of gluing both parts together. Here's my mule with all of the stowage on board. Looks pretty good. I haven't glued the stowage on yet because it's probably a lot easier to paint separately.
Oh yeah, you're gonna paint it, are you?
I might, one day. Time to build the figure.
Another one?
Like with most figures I want gripping a steering wheel or handlebar or whatever, I glue one arm on, make sure it interacts with the steering wheel properly, let it bond so that it won't be knocked out of place, and then add the other arm, making sure that it looks convincing with the steering wheel too. It's not difficult at all, but it is something that you should take your time with. I add the head so we don't have a headless mule man, and there we have it, another figure. That's the 28mm scale M247 half-ton 4x4 utility platform truck, or mule, from Rubicon Models, completed. I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. It's probably not a vehicle that gets a lot of thought, but I think it's interesting and it's nice to have a model of one. I've no idea what function it might serve in a wargame, though I suppose if you put an MG on it, it could be an MG team. Or you could of course give it the recoilless rifle. Speaking of the recoilless rifle, if you do want to add that to the mule, you will need to buy it separately, which is fine really. It means this kit is cheaper for those who don't want the recoilless rifle, and you can buy it separately as its own thing, and it's pretty cheap if you do want it. I am happy with the kit, but there is one thing I find kind of disappointing: the lack of decals. If you look at the box art, the mule clearly has markings, and it would just be nice if we could easily put those on. It's not the worst thing in the world though. It was still a fun, relatively quick and easy build of an unusual vehicle. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. If you'd like to watch me build kits like this one live, I regularly stream my builds both here on YouTube and over on Twitch. You can find a link to Twitch in the description. You probably don't need a link for YouTube. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing, and if you really like the things I do, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi if you're able. Links are in the description. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.